If you want to suffer less, experience a greater degree of freedom in your life while living deeply and authentically, and you just want to make this mysterious experience of being a human being the most beautiful, amazing, marvelous, loving one that it can be, well, listen up, because this video is going to discuss the top 10 ways that our ego prevents us from living in this precise way. You'll be getting practical and easy apply ways on how to transcend these limiting mechanisms so that you can go forth in your life in just a more authentic, free, and soul-aligned way. This top 10 list is a list of the ways ranked from least harmful and pervasive to most harmful and pervasive ways that the ego bites us in the ass, sabotages our well-being, hijacks our authenticity, closes down our growth, and prevents our spirit or higher self from really shining through us and living as us. Much of what I talk about here today is based on what I have witnessed as the most harmful and pervasive ego traps that I've witnessed in myself. So I'll be talking a lot about my own experiences and my own journey today, but also a lot of where I'm coming from is what I witness as the most pervasive ego traps that I've witnessed in my clients, in my coaching practice, and also just from what I observe from the people I encounter in the world as well. I'm a very observant and introspective person, so a lot of the stuff I'm talking about is things I've witnessed in people time and time again, also in myself time and time again. Traps that are not just individual in nature, but are also baked into our culture as well. Our culture promotes them and perpetuates them, and because they can be so normalized and virtually everybody engages in them, they can often be blind to us. And so my intention here today is to illuminate these ego mechanisms for you and also give you the antidote for each mechanism so that you can go forward in your life with greater awareness of how your ego closes down your authentic light, your true self, your higher self, your uniqueness, your gifts, the gifts that you have to give the world to make this world a better place. We'll discuss how the ego closes that down. And all of this is just so that you can go forward on this journey of being a human being with greater openness and greater freedom to be yourself and to navigate this life with a bit more truthfulness and a bit more higher self and soul infused into your experience. So before I get started, I want to briefly talk about what the ego is and what I'm referring to when I use that word, because I operate from a bit of a broader definition than other people when I use that word. So essentially, how I conceive of the ego is that the ego is the aspect of our psyche that creates and generates a sense of self. This includes things like our self-concept, our identity, and it also includes our constellation of beliefs that we have about ourselves and about the world. It includes our worldview, and it also incorporates our unique personality configuration as well. And we need all of this to form a coherent sense of self. We need a sense of separateness and a sense of individuation from the world around us so that we have a coherent way to make sense of and grasp who we are and what we're about in this world. And it's just baked into our brain structure. It's baked into natural human developmental pathways, if you study this stuff, to have this sense of self. And it's completely baked into the way that we perceive and interpret reality. Ego is always, always, always operating in our experience. It's the inner narrator. It's the meaning-making creator that is constantly relaying everything we experience in reality into what that thing we are experiencing significance is to us so that we can better survive and thrive in the world. And that part is key. The function of the ego is primarily to survive, so it's primarily a self-preservational mechanism by nature. And this is very important because that keeps us safe, that keeps us secure, that keeps us stable, that gives us a coherent sense of who we are, and we need that to navigate in our world, to navigate in our culture, to be part of a collective. We really need that sense of individuality, but simultaneously being too identified with this ego and being too rigid within this ego structure can close down a lot of beautiful, amazing things that can be experienced in this lifetime and come through you in this lifetime. It can close down a higher, deeper, truer, more authentic, more intimate, and then also say more spiritual experience with other people and with reality itself. And also being too rigid within this ego structure can just generate a lot of suffering. And I don't want you to suffer too much. I don't want humanity to suffer too much. So that's primarily why I'm making this video. And if you study human development, things like integral theory, spiral dynamics, ego development theory, the books you kind of see in this section over here, You'll learn if you read these that it's actually baked into human development pathways to cultivate a more flexible and open ego container so that more and more of your higher self, your most authentic, most genuine, most self-actualized self can start to take over and start to be the primary driver of your experience rather than your fearful and contracted ego. But an important distinction to make here before I get started with this top 10 list is to just say, and I know most of you probably know this already, is that the ego is not bad. The one who labels the ego as bad is the ego itself. Remember that. So the ego is not bad nor the enemy. It serves an important function within your psyche, which is to give you a sense of self so that you can actually function and be secure in the world. Remember that. It is a part of you. You know, a lot of certain spiritual traditions or certain spiritual teachers, they'll completely view the ego as like this bad thing, and they'll almost have this view of development as if like, you know, a baby is born in the natural state where they're already enlightened, and then the ego comes online, ego consumes them, and then they fall from grace, they fall from heaven. That is not how human development works. That's not how the research says that it works. It is baked into human developmental pathways to live as an ego, to develop an ego. But of course, you know, when we're talking about the higher stages of development, you know, living too rigidly in ego can actually close us down and close down our most authentic life and just from our deepest, wisest self from coming through that. And all of this is so that we can give our gifts more powerfully to the world and mend an ache within the collective. You know, humans are meant to give a gift to life, just as a fruit tree is meant to bear fruit, giving a gift to whoever eats the fruit and gets nourishment from it. So humans are meant to give a gift too, and in the higher stages of development, we kind of have to start transcending this ego structure a little bit. That's what the natural human developmental pathways tell us. If you study human development, this is what you will learn about. That's what the research says. And even in deep spiritual work, like even in enlightenment work, where the focus is on ego transcendence, you know, the ego never goes away. Rather, it's just seen through. It's seen fully for what it is. It drops into the background and continues to serve its self-preservational function. And what the spiritual work allows you to do is to let go and drop the limiting aspects of your ego that are not serving your highest becoming and not serving the love and beauty and truth that is meant to come through you in this lifetime as you grow and as you develop and as you give your unique gifts and share your unique essence with the world. So that's the big picture of ego summarized in my eyes. And I just want to give you that frame as we proceed here, because if you went about this work seeing the ego as an enemy, well, that would just be another ego trap in and of itself, and you would just be jousting and shadowboxing as you go about this work, and you wouldn't get very far. But anyways, guys, I'm speaking for a bit too long here in the intro. I'm ready to start with this top 10 list, so let's jump right in. So at number 10, we have the comparison curse. And I think a quote that goes really well with this one is the classic quote from former US President Theodore Roosevelt, "Comparison is the thief of joy." And this is so true, because when we're constantly weighing and analyzing ourselves in relation to other people, especially when there's a charge of envy behind it, of wanting to be like them, of thinking that they have something we don't, thinking things like, oh, everyone else seems to have it figured out while I'm still over here meandering and struggling. Or if you think, if only I was as talented or as smart or as creative as they are, then I'd be happy. Or when you see posts of your friends and your acquaintances on social media and you think, oh, they're over here living their best life while I'm just here struggling, struggling just to pay the bills. Things like this constant comparison to other people, especially people who deep down, we don't even really want to be like. We just see something and we're like, oh, I want that. Oh, I want to be like them. Is going to sabotage our happiness, and we're never going to really be content with ourselves and with our present moment experience. And life is lived in the present moment. Life is here in the now, and you want to be content with that. You want to be content with yourself. Yeah, this state where we're always going to wish we were someone else in some other place and just never be content. It's not the way that you want to live. And when I think about my own life, I was most susceptible to the comparison curse when I hadn't cultivated a deep understanding of myself and also just a deep intimacy with myself. I see this in my clients too. People are most susceptible to constantly comparing themselves to others when they haven't developed a clear and coherent sense of who they are and what they're about in this life. In a way, this is when the ego structure has not become polished and refined enough yet, when your identity hasn't become polished and refined enough yet to really make a stand in the ground and say, this is who I am. This is what I stand for. This is what I bring to the table. These are my values. This is what I'm about. And so I'd say the primary antidote to this is self-understanding and also self-compassion as well. And self-understanding in the sense of getting clear on what your top values are, what your strengths are, what your unique gifts are, what your highest excitement is, and what your vision for your life is, and going and asserting that in reality wholeheartedly. I'd also recommend studying personality typology systems and gaining understanding of your unique personality type. I find the MBTI and Enneagram personality typing systems to be the most potent, yielding insight on your unique personality and psychological configuration, allowing you to glean what the strengths are and what the weaknesses are of your unique personality configuration, all that so that you can live in alignment with your soul's nature rather than fighting against it. And the thing is, like, when you really built up your identity, you know yourself very well, you know your values, you just are intimate with yourself. When you have a rock solid foundation of this self-understanding, that is the backbone to your experience, you'll naturally stop comparing yourself so much to people because you realize the people that you're comparing yourself to, well, they aren't you. They aren't walking your path. They have different strengths and talents than you. And they have a different personality configuration than you. They have a different calling in life than you do. So of course, their life looks different than yours does. Your path and your life is uniquely yours. Your authenticity to the world is a unique gift that no other human can replicate. And you have to get in touch with that if you really want to be secure in yourself and not always comparing yourself to other people and other people's paths. And I've just found in myself that as my understanding of myself and as my path becomes more and more refined, I just care way less about what other people are doing and what their life looks like. And I still find myself comparing myself to other people, but it's not in this super envious, I wish I was like them type of way. I find the people I compare myself the most to are people within my niche, other coaches and other teachers who are doing similar things to me, but it's not coming from a place of who is better, who has the better insights or anything like that. I've thought of that way before when I wasn't as secure in myself, but really as I've flushed out my practice and flushed out my videos, I've become really clear in what my message is, and I feel very comfortable and very secure in that. And so when I compare myself to other teachers and other coaches, it comes more from a place of, oh, what can I learn from how they're showing up? What can I learn from what they're teaching? How can I take this information to refine my own practice and make it even more uniquely me? It becomes more about education and inspiration rather than this painful game of always comparing your self-worth, which you can do when you're really caught up on that esteem tier of development, if you know what Maslow's hierarchy of needs is. And if I do experience a twinge of envy or jealousy of somebody, then that becomes an area of contemplation and introspection, showing me something that perhaps I need to integrate and develop in myself to become more effective at what I do. But again, when you have a rock solid understanding of yourself and acceptance of yourself, compassion towards yourself, this painful measuring of comparison as a way of viewing self-worth can completely become a piece of your past. I promise you that. And so at number 9, we have the Perfectionist Prison. And I'm sure this one is something that a lot of people can relate to. It's something that's been a huge part of my path. And this refers to how we constantly feel like we need to do everything perfectly to make sure that our work has no flaws and no mistakes, to make sure that the way we present ourselves and to other people and to the world is free of blemishes. Yeah, that whole thing. Well, this can close down our happiness and well-being because it can cause us to become so hyper-fixated on every tiny detail that it can take us incredibly long to do our work. It can withhold us from truly putting ourselves out there in the world. And it can also be this time-wasting endeavor where so much energy and so much time is spent making sure that we are good enough or that we're making the right impression. And a subtle yet insidious thing that I've noticed in my experience and myself is that sometimes your ego can convince you that you just have high standards. You want to make sure that your work is truly world-class, that this impression you're making is truly the right one, that this impression is truly the most impactful one and the best one that it can be. But I encourage any person who suffers from this perfectionism to examine the underlying emotions underpinning the perfection mechanism, to also examine the stories you're telling yourself, because what was true for me was that deep down, beneath the thinking that I just have high standards for my work and really wanting to impact people in the right way, which I do have high standards. Well, beneath this was a lot of fear, fear of judgment, fear of criticism, fear of not being good enough. And so I held myself hostage to near impossible standards for a while. And sometimes I still do hold myself hostage, to be honest, to these standards. And even if you look at the videos at the beginning of my channel, it took me like almost like a month, like a little bit less than a month, or like a month to make a single video, because first what I'd do is I'd write out everything perfectly. I'd make sure the outline and the wording was perfect. Sometimes I'd do multiple takes of the video to make sure that the energy was right, and I'd make sure that it was perfectly edited and everything, and all of this. And now I still have high standards, but I allow the process to be a lot more open and just a lot more messy. And I also have a lot more fun with the creation process. It doesn't take nearly as much energy or time to make a video as it used to. And really, I think the antidote to this rigid perfectionism is just self-compassion, while also having the solid foundation of self-understanding as a backbone, because of course, self-compassion is going to be more powerful if we understand what and who our unique self is in the first place. But I think many of the perfectionist types can relate to this, in that this perfectionism is often always aimed towards one's own self. The inner critic becomes very, very loud when the perfectionist mechanism activated. While at the same time, these people's inner critics can be very, very loud, and at the same time, they can express profound levels of compassion towards a friend or a loved one who may be struggling, where you encourage them and cheer them on even when they mess up, even when they're imperfect. Most of the perfectionists I know are precisely this way. So loving and so compassionate towards others, but to themselves, they're absolutely ruled by their own inner critic. So I see the antidote to this as primarily being self-compassion. But to get started practically with this, start cultivating awareness of that inner critic. Notice what situations it arises in. Notice what its tone is. Notice what its stories and its narratives are. Catch it in the moment when you're being ruled by your inner critic, and just ask yourself, is this really how I want to treat myself? Is this how I would treat a friend or a loved one? And the answer will pretty much always be no. And then just try your best to treat yourself with that compassion. Just try it out to treat yourself as you would treat a loved one, as a trusted friend. And to make it more real and more alive in a behavioral way, start being more vulnerable. Have the courage to be more honest about your shortcomings, about the parts of yourself that you maybe have a difficult time sharing. Start putting out work that is imperfect, that might be a little bit messy, that might be a little bit more open and unpolished. Publish imperfect art. If you look through my catalog of videos, or if you've just been following me for a while and are a regular viewer, at the beginning when I started posting content, everything felt so refined, like I said, and the wording tried to be very perfect. And I got really, really fed up with this self-curation. It felt so limited. It was consuming so much energy. And then I actually had a period of a few months where I basically only posted authentically spontaneous videos with pretty much no planning at all, where I was in nature, just doing a raw talk, creating content in this way, also allowed me to start trusting more in my authentic expression to carry me to where I need to go, to say what needs to be said, and to help me realize I have the message within me, and it's okay if it's a little bit messy in how it's presented. And then in doing that for a while, I really enjoyed that, but also the depth of insight was sacrificed a little bit. So now I've come back to doing, heavily outlined, even partially scripted content that still allows a lot of room for free flow and riffing. And I've been able to do so in a way that still feels very authentic. And I find that I spend probably 75% less energy than I did just 2 years ago, a year and a half ago, when it comes to making a video. So yeah, with the perfectionism, just notice when you're spending so much time and so much energy curating and refining yourself, and just courageously nudge yourself to let your truth rip. Anyway, try it out. See how it goes. You can start small with small amounts of vulnerability. But when you do this, your higher self is essentially saying to your ego, hey, I'm in charge here. I'm not going to let you close down my authentic light. I have a purpose to serve. I have unique gifts to give to the world. I'm not going to let you prevent me from living my life's mission. So graduated vulnerability and letting yourself be more open and messy, publishing imperfect art, just try it out. Just try it out to be yourself and let yourself be completely free. And when you notice your ego trying to close down your authentic expression or curating, contemplate that, introspect that, and try to just let it all come through you, let it all come out of you, and as pure and clean and, pure way as possible. So try it out. Coming in at number 8, we have the comfort zone cage. This one is pretty self-explanatory. When we stay in a small, complacent, and habitual way of being and going in our life so that our experiences become so normal, so everyday, so mundane, so comfortable that we cease to pursue the experiences that will actually grow and expand us into who we are meant to become, into our higher self, into our most self-actualized version. I love what author David Deida says in his book, The Way of the Superior Man, in that life should be lived at our edge. We should live in a way that is just slightly beyond our comfort zone so that we can continue to expand into a greater, wiser, more conscious version of ourselves. Not too much beyond our comfort zone, because often that can kind of collapse and put us back into a contracted, ego-dominant way of being, but just beyond our comfort zone so that we are growing, learning, and evolving at a gradual pace. Because the way ego development works is that, if you study this stuff, like I've said, is that we start out life in a very small, contracted, rigid, purely ego-identified way of being. And then as we go through life, we learn more, we become more aware. Our identity literally is supposed to expand from like a purely self-identified view, eventually to a more community-centric view, ethnocentric view, then to a nation-centric view, then to a world-centric view, and so on. And at any point when we lose touch with our edge and we stay rigidly in our comfort zone, our development becomes arrested and we cease to let in new perspectives, new experiences, new relationships, and we just live in fear. We contract into fear. We live in fear of what would happen if we took a risk, if we took a leap into the unknown, if we considered a different perspective that goes against what we believe. The ego is designed to keep us safe, secure, and stable, so of course it is going to resist anything that rocks the boat. Of course it's going to resist a perspective that it finds threatening to its identity. Of course it will resist an experience that has the potential to rock the foundation of the ego's stability. But to stay in that way of being forever is a trap, a huge, huge, huge trap. It closes down our highest self from coming through us and living as us. It closes us down from living our most authentic, most soul-aligned path. It closes us down from living the calling of our soul. Because guys, your soul is always whispering to you, hey, maybe I should take that risk and move to that new city. Maybe I should make this career change. Maybe I should end this relationship. Maybe I should have this difficult conversation. Maybe I should go on this spiritual retreat. Your soul is always nudging you towards alignment with your inner truth, but your ego is always resisting it. Your ego makes a living off of resisting it. The antidote to this is living at your edge, to always just be slightly pushing yourself, slightly nudging yourself beyond the walls of your ego. This refers to the moments of micro-courage we face every day. Saying a needed truth in a conversation that's only staying at the surface. Speaking up in a meeting when your ego wants to stay quiet. Feeling difficult emotions instead of distracting and numbing yourself from them. Approaching that beautiful person you see on the street. Sincerely saying sorry for something that you did wrong. Sharing a vulnerable part of you when the moment calls for it. Things like these. And another antidote to the comfort zone cage is having trust and faith. I believe trust and faith, particularly a more spiritual form of faith, is a lost virtue in our highly modern, highly rational, highly scientific world. Having and sustaining faith is one of the most important practices that one can engage in to keep their higher self in charge. And when I talk about faith, I'm not talking about some religious belief or some, blind dogma. I'm referring more to a general stance towards life where you just trust that things are going to work out in your favor, in our favor, when we follow our authentic desires, when you move forward in a way that feels exciting and alive and true for you. It's trusting that you yourself have the capability within you to handle whatever comes your way, even though you can't see the whole path ahead. You got to be okay with uncertainty in this. So, for my more spiritually inclined self, it's also trusting in the intelligence of the cosmos, trusting in the goodness of spirit, and that good fortune will come to us when we follow the calling of our hearts, when we follow our highest authenticity. The thing with the ego is that it primarily operates from a scarcity mindset, and a scarcity mindset wants guarantees before it leaps into the unknown. It wants guarantees that it will be safe, secure, stable if it decides to pursue this seemingly risky thing. But the thing is, those guarantees are not always available. Most of the time, they're not available. And in any serious spiritual journey, leaps of faith will inevitably have to be taken. And you'll have to trust in your higher self to take charge and carry you to where you're meant to go in this lifetime. This point is super, super important. I can't stress it enough. But the main point here is to get out of your comfort zone and live at your edge. As I mentioned earlier, starting with gradual, slightly uncomfortable things that you know in your heart that you should do. Even something small that I do sometimes when I'm about to get out of the shower is I turn the water to cold, even though I know my ego hates it. Every time I'm like, don't do it. Why would I do this? And I do that sometimes just to prove to myself that the comfortable zone is not always in charge and does not always govern my life. So live at your edge, guys. It's the difference between staying the same person with the same worldview, with the same emotional problems, with the same grievances versus the person who is growing and expanding into the self-actualization realms, into their highest potential. Coming in at number 7, we have playing the victim. When we constantly blame our problems on another, whether that be another person, our situation, blaming the cards we were dealt in life, whatever external circumstance that it may be, we blame that rather than taking personal responsibility towards bettering ourselves and our lives. And what I'm saying here is nuanced. It very well may be that a core reason that you are suffering in your life could have been heavily influenced by something someone did, by the trauma that you experienced in your past, by the cards that you were dealt in life, or whatever it is. You very well may be a literal victim, quote unquote. But when you're dealt those cards, the question becomes, okay, what are you going to do about it? What can I do about it? Are you going to be stuck in the story of what's happened to you? Or are you going to reclaim your power and actually move forward? It's surprising to me how many people are ruled by this complex, because someone in this mindset is essentially saying, I have no power. I have no control over my life. I'm completely at the whim of my external circumstances. That's essentially what you're saying when you play the victim, even when you are a victim. And of course, when that's what you truly believe, when you truly believe you're a victim, it's like a spell has been cast on you. The spell of, I have no power. And then that's how reality literally appears to you. And it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. In a lot of ways, this point is tied to the previous one in staying in the comfort zone cage. What I've witnessed in myself and in other people is that the narrative of being a victim and being limited can actually be a kind of addicting thing to the ego, because it provides it with a sense of safety and comfortability, and that one never truly has to own their full power. When the ego hides behind the mask and is always playing the victim, it never has to actually risk stepping into anything potentially uncomfortable. It doesn't have to step into the implications that taking responsibility would require. It never has to face the possibility of failure if no effort, if no true spirit or soul is ever put in the first place. It can just keep telling itself this story of limitation, why their life is the way it is. And then their friends will confirm this to them as well. And then it'll just be this whole loop. And it becomes this protective shell against actually having to do anything real, anything genuine, anything slightly courageous and genuinely truthful and genuinely soulful. A classic example of this is the whole manosphere / red pill and even black pill community that I briefly dipped my toes into when I was a teenager. And essentially these men just pretty much blame the entire female sex for pretty much all of their problems and most of society's problems too, thinking things like women only want chads, modern women have unrealistic dating standards, modern women are hypergamous. They always use the word hypergamous. It's a wild word to describe how women supposedly will always go for the richest, wealthiest, most high status guy at all costs. And what's crazy is how elaborate these victim narratives have become for these manosphere people. They're write whole entire manifestos about bone structure, about mewing, about jawline angle, about this thing called canthal tilts, all this pseudoscientific and partially scientific stuff to like perpetuate your own narrative, your own victim narrative, to avoid the simple reality that maybe, just maybe, the problem is spending hours upon hours in forums that teach you to resent half of the human population. They'd rather believe they're doomed just by their height or their jawline angle than admit that they need to work on their personality, their psychology, even their hygiene, and really just their worldview at large. Like I said, I dipped my toes into that whole community for a few months when I was a teenager after a difficult breakup that rendered me feeling pretty shitty about myself and my self-image. And when I found a group of a bunch of men who felt the same way and spoke of these narratives that made me feel better and made me feel seen in my predicament, It provided some fuel to my ego for sure. It provided me with some comfort. But it didn't take me long before I realized that if I just blame my external circumstances and don't take responsibility, then I'm going to get fucking nowhere in my life, and my situation is not going to improve. But that's a more large scale example. There are definitely numerous smaller scale examples that we do partake in all of the time. We all do this. Like, how many of us blame capitalism for everything wrong in our lives while making zero effort to improve the situation? How many of you blame social media for the downfall of your attention span and maybe for your anxiety and your stress? How many people blame society for their problems while doing nothing to contribute to positive change? The victim mindset takes different flavors depending on which echo chamber that you fall into. And again, that's not to say that there's not some truth in whatever external thing is playing a role in being responsible for your predicament. That's not denying that. The real damaging thing about playing the victim is that you disown your own power. You disown your ability to actually make change and do something about it. And you contract and you default into this comfortable narrative that many people around you may adhere to, that provides you with a way to relate to other people. You know, they also have the same biases as you and the same worldview, and they go and confirm that. And that provides you with some sense of security and some comfort and some sense of community, but it ultimately leaves you powerless and feeling limited. So the antidote to playing the victim is radical responsibility, taking full responsibility for your life situation, and taking full responsibility for your response to the unique cards that you've been dealt with in your life, where you stop waiting for the world to change and you start actively changing your world and shaping it according to how your higher self desires it to be. And yeah, that might be a bit scarier than playing the victim, because now you're actually accountable. Failure is on the table now, but now you're at least being real. Now you're actually working to create the life that you desire rather than complaining about the one that you currently have, thinking that you're stuck in it and that there's no way out. I absolutely promise you, by claiming your power and taking full responsibility, by taking radical responsibility, that's the first way to getting out and to living a more soul-aligned life. So coming in at number 6, we have the lone wolf / specialness shield. And this one, maybe not everyone can relate to, but given my audience's heavy spiritual inclination, and given this being something that I've dealt with and I do deal with, I think this is an incredibly important ego mechanism to talk about, because it can be quite subtle. It's not often talked about, and it can also be super pervasive over one's experience as well. And again, this one specifically is something that intellectually gifted people, or maybe spiritually gifted people, or really any gifted human who has any sort of, gift in some sort of way can suffer from. And the reality is, guys, if you've been resonating with me and my message and this type of content in general, if you're doing this deep developmental and spiritual work and you're trying to do things like transcend limiting aspects of your ego so your higher self can take over and take charge, if you're doing things like really pursuing truth and trying to live radically authentically, the odds are that you probably are spiritually and existentially gifted to a degree. Like, barely anyone is doing this stuff, barely anybody is talking about this stuff, and spiritual and existential giftedness is quite a rare virtue in this world. I talk about this a lot in my most recent video, What is Spirituality? And how to cultivate spiritual intelligence. And essentially, in that video, I talk about how our world operates from a very low level of SQ, which SQ means spiritual intelligence, and that this is a big reason that our world is in the meta-crisis state that it is in. So yeah, the reality is if you are drawn to this stuff and you pursue spiritual work naturally, you're just naturally called to it, you're naturally drawn to it, you're probably existentially gifted to a degree. You probably feel somewhat of an outsider because of this gift, because of your experiences, your internal world, your unique way of perceiving, the unique way that your psyche and that your soul is oriented. Yeah, it's just different from the masses who are not nearly as spiritually inclined. And so it's a great thing to be gifted like this, whether it's spiritually or intellectually or whatever. It could be some other form of gift too. But when the ego realizes this giftedness, when the ego realizes this uniqueness, it can spin up a lot of narratives. It can spin up a lot of bullshit that just, bites us in the ass and sabotages us. And this precise mechanism of sabotage was what I am calling the lone wolf or specialness shield. I think I saw another video on YouTube that described this sort of similar mechanism. And what this refers to is the ego's inclination to take this giftedness, to take this sense of uniqueness, to take this depth, and essentially utilize it to create this fortress of isolation, which separates us and fragments us from our innermost truth, but also from connection with others and from the world as large as well. The fundamental narrative that the ego spins is this narrative that goes like, my depth of consciousness sets me apart from everyone else. My inner world is too complex for others to grasp. I've seen truths that others haven't even noticed exist. And the thing is, these narratives, well, they aren't entirely wrong. In some ways, they can actually be like pretty true. If you've done this spiritual work, if you've done a deep meditative path, if you've had profound spiritual highs, then, and you feel you have glimpsed some deep truths of the universe, or even if you've just done a lot of shadow work, and that's been very fruitful, then there totally is going to be an element of not wanting to engage nearly as much with the everyday world and with the masses, which is often just defined by conversations about gossip, or whatever bullshit is in the news, or something about celebrities or sports or whatever. It's super, super natural for people of higher consciousness to start caring way less about that stuff. But again, what I'm referring to here is rather subtle. It may be true that you are quite gifted and unique, but again, watch what the ego is doing with that information, because I know in my life, what I've done a lot, and I know this is true for a lot of other people into this work as well, I've seen it with clients, is that I've utilized my perceived spiritual giftedness to essentially just isolate and shut out normal human world and normal human connection, just like normal human stuff. I shut it out, thinking things like, oh, my inner world is way too complex for normal therapy. The therapist would never be able to understand and see me fully. Or thinking things like, oh, nobody's going to understand me spiritually. What's the point of even talking to them at all? I can never share my real thoughts in conversations because no one will ever understand them. And again, there may be a lot of truth in these narratives, but what I found in myself time and time again was that these narratives were creating a fortress that always saw virtually anything in the external world as lower consciousness, or even like parts within my internal world that I label as lower consciousness or lower vibration, I would repress. And so I'd write all that stuff off and separate myself from it. But in contemplating what was beneath it all was this attachment to maintaining this like specialness identity, this uniqueness identity. Beneath it all was this deep fear of being normal, of being ordinary. So I'd avoid ordinary things. I'd avoid normal conversations. I'd avoid quote unquote normies as much as I possibly could. And I just spend a lot of my time alone, even though deep down I did feel lonely. I really did deeply desire to connect with others, both with other people and with the parts of myself that I had been disowning. I wanted to be seen in my fullness and connect with others in their fullness too, but I wasn't able to do so because I couldn't even accept myself and my fullness, and thus couldn't express myself in my fullness. I was buffing up this spiritual and existential aspect of myself, creating this whole identity around it, creating this sense of specialness around it. I told myself I would just wait until I found the perfect, most aligned community, the perfect, most aligned friends, the perfect, most aligned romantic partner, the perfect, most aligned everything. But those conditions never really came about because my standards were impossible, and they were designed to help solidify this fortress of specialness that I had been standing behind. And I even developed shadows because of this mechanism too. I would find myself envying the normal, embodied, grounded people. I found myself envying the people who could just spark up a conversation with anyone and drop into connection that way. My envy was showing the parts of myself that I was disowning, which was just grounded embodiment in the human world and a sense of connection to people around me. And deep down, the reason for this lone wolf specialist shield was, again, the fear of being ordinary, especially the fear of being perceived as ordinary. I feared just being a normal human. I was attached to feeling above and more conscious than others, and that attachment was literally a shield from the world. This has been a pretty big part of my journey. I still do experience this, although, I'm much more aware of how that operates now. I'm just operate much differently given this, and I know it's true for a lot of others as well, so that's why I want to say it. I work with some clients who experience the same thing, and really the antidote to this is radical acceptance of all aspects of the human experience. It's the okayness with being ordinary. I actually see a huge milestone in the spiritual path as this ability to just be an everyday, normal, ordinary human. I think going deeper into the spiritual work should simultaneously take one both to a more ordinary and a more extraordinary place at the same time. Both can be true simultaneously. I think the real spiritual achievement isn't being above life, it's being able to engage in all aspects of life more fully and with more genuine presence, consciousness, and love. I love the saying that goes like, before enlightenment, chop wood and carry water. after enlightenment, chop wood, and carry water. You still do normal stuff, you still do everyday human stuff, but you do it from a more conscious place. You do it from a place of seeing things a little bit differently, from acting and behaving a little bit more differently, purely, just not with this nagging sense that you have to be attached to this like way of being, to this specific identity. So the lone wolf and specialness shield is essentially an advanced strategy to meet one's esteem needs, which represent the need to feel valuable, significant, respected, and unique. But it's trying to meet these needs while sort of disowning the tier below it, which is community and belonging. So they isolate themselves in order to maintain this specialness identity. And the odds are that one in this frame of mind will have to just go back and do some basic esteem work, developing competence in the world, receiving respect from others for their contributions, and also just developing self-respect as well through facing their actual challenges, through meeting themselves where they're actually at, rather than avoiding or denying or isolating themselves in the name of specialness. Remember to be an ordinary human, guys, and to open yourself to all parts of yourself, even the much younger parts of yourself that you label as lower consciousness or lower vibration. They are all part of you. We all have these parts of ourselves. We all have these inner child sub-personalities that may come from a more early state of consciousness. But we have to let that integrate into our entire being. And we have to allow ourselves to be whole, to be uniquely as we are, even when we're speaking from a very spiritually advanced and just high consciousness place. Sometimes we can contract and fall into a bit of a, lower state of being, lower in the sense of like Hawkins scale of consciousness. We may fall into like a lower emotion and express that, but that's completely valid because we're human. We experience the whole spectrum of emotions. We have these different sub-personalities that have different needs and wants, and they're always pulling different chords within us. So we have to give all of those parts of us a place in the psyche. We can't just disown them. We can't just deny them. And in doing that, we have to be an ordinary human as well. We can't just always be extraordinary, can't just be attached to what we perceive as good and amazing and unique. I think you get what I'm saying. Let's move to number 5. All right, guys, so I took a little bit of a break and now I'm back, and now we can talk about number 5, which is fantasization. So fantasization is one of the ego's most subtle yet most pervasive mechanisms that can come in the form of daydreaming, of wishfully thinking about the future, but not actually doing anything about it. This is somewhat related to the earlier point about the comfort zone cage, but I wanted to give this mechanism a point of its own because it can be super pervasive and has been super pervasive for me and a lot of people I've worked with and just a lot of people I know. And I want to say first that fantasizing and paying keen attention to your inner visions can be immensely powerful and immensely beneficial for getting in touch with the calling of your soul. Our soul essentially speaks to us through our daydreams, through our fantasies, through the visions and the intuitions that we get. And when I find myself daydreaming, one of my core visions is this vision of living in the mountains in a lush forest. Maybe there's a river going through the land where I own several acres and I have my own garden and I grow my own food and I have a few close friends and loved ones around me. And I know this vision is sort of like my higher self telling me like, this is the ideal environment for you. Seek to build your life so you can live in precisely this way. And I'm building my life to eventually be able to purchase this plot of land in the future. And I'm seeking out the connections and have some of the connections already of people who want to go in on this idea with me. But the ego trap is when you use fantasization as an escape or as a way to like mentally masturbate and avoid the reality of your present situation, to avoid the discomfort of the reality that is right in front of you. I know in some of my most chaotic and uncertain times of my life, there's always some intense fantasy that comes online that helps me numb and avoid the reality of the situation. And it's in these times where I'd go into my head and spend hours daydreaming. I'd spend hours daydreaming and fleshing out the vision that I just told you guys about the mountains and living in nature. And it's also in these chaotic and rather turbulent and uncertain times that I'd often develop extremely, like strangely intense crushes on people. People who are mostly unavailable and were far away and were not accessible to me. And I'd fantasize about these women and our potential life together and how amazing it would be. And it was essentially this enormous mental masturbation session that completely took me out of the present moment and had me completely avoiding the tasks and the responsibilities that were right in front of me. I stopped living at my edge and I started living in the comfortable fantasies of my own head. And it was weird because a part of me knew that spending so much time fantasizing, that I was actually in this fantasizing was being revealed certain callings of my soul. I was learning about myself. I knew I was being revealed aspects of my psyche that desired integration and that wanted to come through me and be actualized in the world. And I was convincing myself that I was doing spiritual work or some form of self-actualization work in this. And in some sense, I kind of was. I was very much open to exploring my inner landscape and was just very intimate with it. But in a large sense, I was still just avoiding. I was just coping. I was just mentally masturbating. You have to be radically honest with yourself in this work, guys. I know people who for years spent their whole life primarily in the daydreaming and the fantasizing realm because they were too afraid, they didn't believe in themselves, and they were avoiding the discomfort of truly living at their edge and doing what their soul, their higher self, wanted to do. So they just thought about it, they just fantasized about it instead of making it real and actual in the world. In my eyes, the antidote to fantasization is living at your edge with embodied presence and ruthless immediacy. You have to bridge the gap between vision and action, making that gap so small that there's not really a way for your ego to hide in fantasy, because all fantasization really is just the ego getting the dopamine hit of achievement without really taking the risk of doing the real thing. You have to get out of your head and into the body and engage in some form of like extroverted sensing that gets you in touch with the immediacy of your environment. When you find yourself in your head too much, go work out, go for a run, dance, or turn the water to cold when you're in the shower. Things like this, getting in the body, inhabiting the body fully, and having the confidence in this vessel that is your body to go and actualize your soul's calling is ultimately the antidote to fantasization. And I also find for me just being around people and being around friends and being around family and just being really present with them is something that really grounds me in my direct experience and my body. So that's been a big antidote for fantasization for me as well. But ultimately, I'm not writing off, going into your inner landscape and daydreaming a little bit as a bad thing. Like I've said, you can really get in touch with your authentic desires and the calling of your soul in this. But if you do it too much, you can start mentally masturbating and just reaping the dopamine hit of thinking about the thing but not actually doing it. So stop being so much in your head and get into your body, lean into discomfort, and operate at your edge. That's the antidote to this. So coming in at number 4, we have the future happiness delusion. I see this all the time. I think at some point every human on planet Earth has engaged in this mechanism at one time or another. And it's this narrative that when I have this, or once this happens, or once I make this change, then I will be truly happy. Then I will be truly fulfilled. It's the tendency of the ego to always look towards the future for true, genuine fulfillment, while simultaneously being blind to the happiness and fulfillment that is available right here, right now. And as I speak these, I always find myself giving the ego some credence again. I think for all of these points, I've said, hey, the ego's valid in this in some way, but it can also kind of hijack the process as well. This work is very both and, because it is true that working towards a better future and having a vision and trying to make more money and working towards a job promotion or working towards buying a house or that beautiful plot of land or whatever can genuinely improve your life and move you closer to a soul-aligned life, all of that is genuinely true, that you want to move towards that, and that might make you feel more fulfilled in the future. Yet at the same time, the trap is when you become so fixated on the future, on achieving that thing in the future, on having that thing in the future, that you cease to be grateful for the present moment, for what's here right now. You cease to see the present moment for the awe, the beauty, the mystery, the marvel of what it truly is. You also, in a lot of ways, depending on how the future happiness delusion is manifesting within you, cease to give yourself credit, cease to give yourself love. I know for me, I've been super, super attached to this idea of development and being a developing person in my life, that I was always orienting myself towards how I would progress and develop in my life in the future, that I rarely, if ever, gave myself credit for who I was and what I had now. I often saw my present self and present situation as inadequate and needed improving, so I wouldn't give myself the love and the nourishment that I so direly wanted, that I so direly needed. Reality would appear to me as this place that wasn't good enough now. I wasn't content with it, and I felt I always had to do something to improve it. And being so entranced with that mindset, there wasn't much room at all to experience happiness, to experience that state of eudaimonia that our soul craves and is the natural state of the thriving human. The thing about life is that there is only the present moment. There is only now. Anything that isn't happening right here, right now, that isn't a manifestation of right fucking now is imaginary. The future is imaginary. The past is imaginary. And happiness is just some concept if it's not something that's in your experience right here, right now. You can only experience happiness in the present moment. And what you learn on the journey is that this immense bliss, this immense love and peace and inner harmony is available in every single moment. You just have to drop into it. But your ego will resist dropping into it because the ego always wants to maintain the story of progress, the story of improvement, of seeking to make life better and better for itself. And so that's why it's so fucking important to be able to just drop all of that stuff while still holding it as a part of you, of course. Not that these stories want to be 100% eradicated from your being, but it's important to be able to drop all of that stuff and just fucking be. To just be here now. That's the antidote to the future happiness delusion. Just literally fucking being here now. Could be doing things like meditation, breath work, being in nature with no agenda, having completely free and spontaneous time for yourself to do whatever your highest excitement in the moment is. You can watch my previous video titled, "What if you put no restrictions on your consciousness for 1 week?" to get put onto a really powerful practice for being here now, which essentially was an experiment that I did where I literally did whatever I felt like doing for 1 week, and I felt awesome. I had no plan, no agenda, other than to follow what my highest excitement was, and that felt amazing. I got in touch with things that I was avoiding at the time, which a lot of it was connection with other people, and I rekindled with some old friends, and I even went out to bars and stuff and drank some alcohol, even though I am not someone who is typically into that lifestyle at all. And I have to say, it was really fucking fun. And what I learned from that is that you should just always follow your highest excitement for the most part. Life should always be lived that way. Your highest excitement is the gateway to a soul-aligned life. Life ingrains into you unique curiosities and desires and intuitions and excitements for a reason. They're gateways to your self-actualization. They're gateways to your soul, and you have to follow them if you want to live a soul-aligned life, if you want to live the life that you are meant to live, where your higher self is truly in charge. So all of that is to say, happiness in the future is a pure delusion. Real happiness is found right here, right now, in the present moment. So live a life where you are in touch with yourself and in touch with being here now. So coming in at the third most harmful ego trap in my eyes is the spiritual/intellectual bypass. If you've dipped your toes into the spiritual waters, you've probably come across this term, but essentially it's when we utilize spiritual, could also be intellectual concepts as well, as a means to avoid feeling difficult emotions, avoid taking responsibility for our actions, or avoid dealing with the messy, uncomfortable realities of being a human being. It's when we use our spiritual knowledge or our intellectual understanding as a shield against actually doing the real inner work that needs to be done. So point number 6 I described earlier with the lone wolf and specialness shield was a very specific form of spiritual bypassing, and I felt the need to include it as its own point due to how specific it is to my audience and people into the spiritual work. I know it's something that I've really dealt with, so I want to say it, but this spiritual bypassing is getting at the heart of what this shield really is, which is to avoid the raw, uncomfortable, often painful work of actually transforming our consciousness. Maybe you've had some spiritual realization where you realize everyone and everything is one, so you use that as an excuse to avoid setting boundaries with people, and you let people and things sap your energy. I'm projecting here. That's totally been me. I have done that. And another thing I commonly see is spiritual people appearing and feeling so non-attached. They think it's a spiritual thing to do to remain in a state of non-attachment, so they just kind of go with the flow with everything and anything that happens to them. They cease to have a strong sense of inner fortitude and groundedness. Spiritual bypassing is also saying things like, oh, this conversation is so low vibration, but then you shut down and leave once you're challenged. Or getting so into meditation and observing your thoughts without judgment while never actually having the courage to change your destructive patterns. You just keep witnessing them and distancing yourself more and more from them. Another classic form of spiritual bypassing I've seen is people disowning their need for money because they see money as unspiritual or money as the root of all evil or something, and they see themselves as above and beyond that, so they essentially live off pennies and can barely get their basic needs met, which in my eyes makes them a lot less effective in the world. Like, you have needs, bro, and you gotta own them. We all deserve to live in a world where we are abundant and have our basic needs met. That's the backbone of where our soul-aligned life is going to offshoot of. If you're constantly worrying about your basic needs, and how can you do the work that you're meant to do on this earth? The intellectual bypass is also a mechanism that is just as pervasive. You can become so sophisticated in your understanding of your psyche and your problems and of reality itself that understanding becomes a substitute for dealing with your issues and solving them. You might be able to perfectly articulate your trauma patterns, your level of ego development. You can probably even name every cognitive distortion, map out your entire psychological landscape, but you're still living the same life, just with a more elaborate story about why you are. So the intellect and the spiritual identity becomes a fortress where you can analyze your life instead of living it and being fully in it. I think every person who dips their toes into these higher consciousness waters will experience some form of spiritual or intellectual bypassing at some point. It's a very normal and natural thing to do, given that we have an ego. The ego has needs and wants and desires and constantly is filtering our perception of reality in order to contort to that. The ego is very clever, and if we aren't maintaining radical honesty and living in truth, we are going to fall prey to its traps. And so that's why genuine seeing is necessary at all times, because what's dangerous about this is that you can genuinely feel like you're growing and evolving and progressing spiritually. And in some ways you probably are, but in a lot of ways you are just using concepts to avoid the life demands and the inner work that is right in front of you. You fail to meet yourself where you're at. You fail to live at your edge. And so you'll read all these spiritual books. You might even attend workshops. You might even meditate a lot and have psychedelic experiences that yield profound insights, but are you actually doing anything with these concepts, with these insights, to go into your embodied experience, your relationships, your work and career, into the world, and the way that you show up to life? Or are you just avoiding going into the fire that ordinary human life sometimes can be? There's a whole side to spirituality that is just kind of like this dark, messy, really painful place, because in a lot of ways when you are spiritually awakening and you're just evolving your consciousness, well, an older part of you is kind of dying, and that can be very, very difficult. The ego is going to activate a lot of defense mechanisms in that. The ego is going to get super, super triggered and activated in that. And there's this kind of like letting go process so that this, more higher, more true, more self-actualized self can, live in you and live as you. So there's kind of like a death process that takes place, and that can be very ugly, very messy. And it's a side of spirituality that not many people talk about, or maybe people talk about it, but they never actually show what it's like on camera because it's not Instagram worthy. So things like this is how, brutal spirituality can be. So I just want to name that. But a lot of spiritual bypassing is an overemphasis on the transcendent aspect of spirituality. I want to say this, but it's also just as spiritual to go fully into the descendant aspect of spirituality, which refers to fully going into this human incarnation, into our human finiteness and our sense of limitation, and going and making love to the world in this limited 3D plane of existence. And that's the antidote. That's the antidote to spiritual bypassing in my eyes is descendence, going fully into this limited nature of being a human and approaching it with radical honesty and radical openness. And specifically when it comes to spiritual bypassing, descending into the wound itself, descending into the thing that you're bypassing rather than remaining above and beyond it with intellectual concepts. Ask yourself these questions to illuminate your spiritual ego and maybe illuminate some ways that you may be spiritually bypassing. You can ask yourself, why am I really on this spiritual path? Do I feel a need to prove my spirituality to myself or to others? Do I use spirituality as a way to feel more special or different than others? Am I being truly honest with myself about my spiritual realizations and my insights? Are there aspects of my life that I cover up or avoid in the name of spirituality? Do I feel a need to appear wise and enlightened? Can I admit that I'm wrong or that I don't know something in spiritual conversations? Am I applying these spiritual insights to my daily life, or are they just concepts? How do I respond to criticism about my spiritual beliefs and practices? Contemplate these questions, but also don't get lost in your head in dealing with spiritual bypassing and employing the antidote of descending fully into this carnation. There's an element of somatic and emotional reckoning that needs to take place. Your body and your emotions are the compass that holds the insights to where you are bypassing, so listen to them. When you drop from your head into your lived experience, you can bypass the spiritual bypass and actually feel the real thing, actually feel the real wound and get deeply in touch with it and get deeply intimate with it. For me, as I've mentioned earlier, there was a lot of fear of not being special, of not being unique. I had this fear of being exposed or something like that. It was pretty irrational, but again, none of the ego's games are rational. So probe into your experience and really just feel the wound. Strong emphasis on feeling. You have to feel yourself and your wounds. Real spiritual work, like I've said, it's messy. It's painful. Like I've said, it's not Instagram worthy. It's stuff like admitting that you just want to be loved, admitting that you just want to be seen for who you are. It's admitting that you're jealous, that you're scared, that you're lost, that you're afraid of death. It's things like this. And genuine spirituality is just living in truth. That's all it really is. So be honest with yourself. Meet yourself where you're at and don't escape to some perceived high, transcended place, because the ego, I guarantee, is going to come back and bite you in the ass. Whatever you're avoiding will just come back and bite you in the ass. That's just karma. That's just truth. So now coming in at the second most harmful ego trap is people pleasing. Holy motherfucking shit. This one is so pervasive for so many people that there are millions, probably billions of people who in this lifetime have closed down their authentic light, their truth, their highest excitement, simply to please other people, simply to fit in, as a means to avoid the discomfort of being a little bit polarizing through making a claim in the ground and saying, this is who I am, this is what I'm about, and this is what I'm doing in this life. People go their entire lives conforming and capitulating to others' needs and wants that they don't even know who and what their authentic self is. They live as chameleons, performing, pleasing, blending in with little to no stable and rooted and grounded sense of self. They become addicted to validation. They become addicted to gaining others' approval. And I'm especially speaking to the high achievers here, to those who think they are doing great and amazing things in this life, but it's really deep down all just to gain approval, to gain some sense of validation, whether it be from other people. It's usually primarily from other people, but it can also be for their own wounded ego who feel it needs to be great and do amazing things in order to feel worthy. This is probably the most classic client archetype that I work with. Those who are very intelligent, very capable individuals who are high achieving and have a great work ethic, and they're just very intelligent humans, but they realize that none of it has been authentic. It was always done to please others and to make themselves feel worthy. And then they hire me to help uncover their authentic self and then make it embodied in the world. I've seen it firsthand. I've seen it very intimately. People repress their own truth in order to gain approval. It happens all the time. Everyone has done it in their life at some point, but if you keep doing it over and over and over again, well, you can wave an authentic, soul-aligned life goodbye. Because the reality of living an authentic life is that you are going to irritate some people. You're going to make some people angry. People won't like you. It might not be what your parents envisioned for you. You might have to deal with some loneliness of following a different path than everyone else. Some people may write you off as a little bit weird, wacky, crazy, delusional, and at worst, they'll say you're evil or they'll say you're a devil, but that's the price you pay for living in truth. And it's a small price to pay given that you are rewarded with living a life that's actually yours, not what somebody else wanted for you or told you that you should do. You're rewarded with this background sense of knowing that you're doing exactly what you're meant to be doing on this earth. There's not this grasping for being someone else or being somewhere else. You know exactly who you are. You show up as that person. You live in congruence and you love and trust wholeheartedly in your authentic light as being the very highest and most loving expression that you can give to the world. Your most authentic expression is the most godly way that you can express and be in the world. And why would you want to do anything other than that of the way of being of God, which is the highest good, the highest love, the highest truth? To be authentic is to literally express God in this lifetime. And I view the antidote to people-pleasing as being self-trust and really powerfully claiming one's authority, given that people who people-please don't trust themselves. They've outsourced their internal compass to other people's reactions, and they've shut down their authentic instincts and desires and intuition in order to please other people, and they need to reclaim that trust and that knowing that what they truly feel and desire is valid, that it's a core part of who they are. And so the antidote is really just following your authentic desire, following the calling of your heart, and along the way with that, you'll have to cultivate the tolerance of other people's disapproval. You have to learn to set boundaries without guilt. You have to learn to reclaim your no and fully own your no. At the core of it, you have to realize that being disliked for who you are is better than being liked for who you are not. Before this is realized and experienced, you'll probably just keep people-pleasing. And the thing about people-pleasing also is that even when you try and make everyone like you, it just doesn't work anyway. Like, no matter what you do, it just won't work. So why do you try to do it anyway? I'm really passionate about this one. I think you can tell here because it's so harmful to people-please over and over and over again. And also at the same time, the need to be liked and accepted is so valid. And it's a core need that all humans have. But I found for myself and for the clients that I work with is that when they uncover more of their authentic self, they can still get that need of being liked and being validated and met, and they can actually do so in a more nourishing way because they know themselves more. They're clear on who they are and what their top values are and what they're about in this life, and then they can do that and find those similarly minded people and develop an authentic, genuine, nourishing, symbiotic relationship with them. And then that's way more fulfilling than just staying at the surface with a bunch of different people, constantly performing and analyzing your self-image and literally being a chameleon in order to get them to like and approve of you. Radical authenticity is a core component of my life philosophy. The world needs to see your authentic light. Your authentic light has a gift that will help all of us. So please, 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 please step into that. I give you a permission slip right now to step into that. All right, guys. Now it is time to explain the most harmful ego trap of all time. And this one is very simple. It's straight to the point. It's something we all do every single day, likely for multiple hours, and that is distraction. Really, all of these mechanisms that I've described so far are just various forms of distraction. That is a distraction from what is, a distraction from truth. But this point is so relevant because our modern, fast-paced, digital, hyper-capitalistic culture has birthed new distractions around every fucking corner. Social media, porn, dating apps, whatever else you can find on the internet, all these distracting pop-up ads, junk food, so many things, and this problem has become so pervasive. People spend like 6 hours per day on their phone, and really probably only like 1 or 2 of those hours is necessary and needed. multiple thousands of hours are lost per year that could be spent on personal development, on going outside, on reading books, on diving into your shadow, on feeling and introspecting your psychological wounds, even doing more practical stuff like spending time with family and just socializing. Things like this are lost because of distraction. This dopamine economy is literally rewiring our brains to always go for the short, quick hit of dopamine, and our attention spans are suffering as a result. And it's just making our minds more reactionary and more simplistic. And this is very, very dangerous. It makes it harder to develop as a human. It makes it harder to develop the more open, flexible, complex mind that higher ego development and self-actualization work entails. It makes people dumber. And this is very, very dangerous. I think this is playing a huge role in really toxic political leaders getting elected. This problem of distraction pervades our entire society. Most people can't even read like a freaking book. Their attention spans are so fried, and so they're relegated to just having this very simplistic, like reactionary, like spur of the moment, kind of like psycho-retarded like information that you get on social media. That's the stuff that gets programmed into people's brains because they don't have the attention span for anything else. And I know I'm going on a bit of a rant here, but I'm going to tie this back to distraction and say that if you want to keep your higher self in charge, you got to distance yourself from the stuff a little bit. You got to distance yourself from this dopamine economy. That's not to say that you don't have social media, you don't go on the internet. I think all this stuff is actually needed to a degree. It definitely is, but there needs to be boundaries on this, like really strong boundaries on this. And I'm saying this as someone who uses their smartphone for about 4 hours per day. My weekly screen time tells me that. It's about 4 hours per day. And I think only 2 of those hours at most are really necessary. So that means I'm losing 2 hours per day, and that adds up to nearly 1,000 hours per year of me distracting myself just with my smartphone alone. And that's time that I could be spent doing something more alive and nourishing. That's time I could be spending serving you guys and making videos or working with clients or whatever it is. I fall prey to this stuff too. I know very few people who don't. I actually don't think I know really anybody at all who doesn't. And this problem is so pervasive that it genuinely worries me that the future generations of humans could actually backtrack in their development because of this, and that societal and social progress will halt because of this. I think to a degree we're already kind of seeing this actually. And it's sad, it's very sad, but to talk more specifically about the mechanism of distraction really at the core of it is a form of avoidance. It's a form of escaping pain. And to engage in genuine spiritual and developmental work, you have to be with what is. You have to feel your pain. You have to sit with it and process it and integrate it. And with all of these high dopamine distractions at every corner, it's hard to do that. It's much harder to do that. People are wasting their lives distracting themselves, their entire lives distracting themselves. They're getting riled up in echo chambers and they're escaping with porn and social media that they never actually face themselves. They never actually sit with themselves and develop the courage to lean into their edge or even know what their edge is in the first place. It's so fucking sad how distracted we all are, but I see the antidote as primarily being the ability to just tolerate yourself, to be bored, and to just kind of sit with yourself. As I've said, it's the ability to be alone with yourself, to feel your discomfort, to sit with your anxiety, to actually feel the existential weight of just existing. That's the antidote, just literally feeling yourself, tolerating yourself. Another antidote is having a life vision and life path that actually excites you, that deeply excites you, that motivates you, and makes you actually want to not distract yourself. Think about the nature of distraction for a second. It's implied that when you are distracting yourself, that there's something you should be doing or that you would rather be doing, but you're not doing because you are distracting yourself. And if you don't have a vision and a path that actually makes you not want to engage in these distractions, then you'll just keep engaging in them, plain and simple. So you have to cultivate a powerful life vision and life purpose. For some more practical advice on this point, check out my video, Your Soul Will Shine When You Stop Distracting Yourself. That video is all about distraction and we'll dive deeper into this mechanism than this video does. But guys, it's crazy because you probably lose thousands and thousands of hours per year distracting yourself. Thousands of hours! Those hours spent distracting yourself on your phone, you don't gain back. Life is precious. Life is sacred, and we need you stepping into your higher self, The world needs it. The world is suffering, and we literally need you. We need you to stop distracting yourself. So please, please, please stop doing it. And I promise you, I also will try my best to stop doing it as well. In no way, shape, or form am I free of this one. And really all of these mechanisms to a degree, I still find myself engaging in from time to time. I don't claim to be coming from some really high transcendent place where I've completely solved all of this stuff. It's a work in progress. I'm a work in progress. This whole channel, a lot of it's just my journey and sharing my insights as we go. So anyways, these are the top 10 most harmful ego traps in my eyes. You probably notice how many of them interlink and overlap with each other because that's just the nature of living an ego. The ego wants to preserve itself. It wants to stay safe and survive, and so it employs all of these mechanisms to keep itself safe. And as a byproduct of doing this, it fails to live in truth. It fails to see the reality of itself and its situation, and so it creates a wall, a barrier, a boundary between itself and from truth, from authenticity, from genuine true seeing. The ego doesn't care about what is true. It only cares about preserving itself, so it spins all sort of nice sounding narratives in order to do this, but true spirituality demands you live in truth, capital T, truth, and living a truthful life is how you keep the higher self in charge. You need to live radically honestly and cut through the bullshit, or your ego will just trap you and govern your life and close down your authentic light, and you'll never push into the self-actualization and self-transcendence tiers of development. These are the more soul-aligned tiers of development. Instead, you'll basically just be a puppet to your ego, a survival puppet who has all these complex mechanisms of avoiding truth. And in this, you'll experience this subtle restlessness that knows that something isn't quite right, that life isn't quite the experience that you want it to be. There will be a subtle knowing, a subtle intuition that you could do more, that you could be more, that you could perhaps live a little bit closer to your soul, that you could live life closer to your heart and closer to your truth. If you live solely in ego, you will never know this and truly experience it. You'll never know who you truly are. And in my life philosophy, living in accordance with who you truly are is what life is all about. It's the purpose of our existence to incarnate the authentic self. It's baked into human developmental pathways to slowly and gradually transcend this fearful, contracted ego and let spirit, aka our higher self, take over. Lack of spirit is why our world is suffering. Lack of spirit, lack of godliness is why our world is suffering. Why we have an immense wealth gap. Why toxic political leaders have been elected in many countries. Why billions live in poverty. It's time to bring spirit and soul into the world and incarnate the authentic self. I know because you are still watching that deep down you know this. So start doing the work. Start diving into yourself. Start feeling into yourself. Start gaining awareness of your ego. I trust that you will find the right resources for this. You could take a look at my bookshelf up here. Look at some of my other videos as well. Go consume content from other brilliant, amazing creators out there. Really, my videos are only a gateway. That's all a video or a book really is. It's just a gateway for you to actually go and do the work and do this thing yourself. So now go through the gate and remember this. And I know you already know this too. The ego is not bad. It's not the enemy. It serves a function, an important function of self-preservation. And you can get free of the ego's grips while still allowing this important function of self-preservation to serve its purpose so that you can go and incarnate the authentic self and go live a soul-aligned life. If you resonate with me and my message, I do offer coaching. There will be more info on that in the comments. But anyways, guys, that's really all I have for today. Go take this video and go make love to the world with it. I hope you all have a great day and peace.